Today is a day that we have been waiting for quite some time at this point. It's time for us to shift our focus from some of the areas that we have been working on up to this point in this world to a brand new area over in yonder direction where we've done a little bit of some redstone shenanigans and we've talked a lot about what we might do in the future. Well, the future has arrived. The future is today. And today we are going to get started on the industrial area of this world. So to briefly get you caught up a little bit, we've been working a lot in this area right here, which is over near our fantasy part of the world, which is going to eventually encompass all of the land out in this direction everywhere we go. And this just so happens to be one of the first areas that we put together for the fantasy spot. Now, the fantasy spot only marked one of the three different areas. And of course, we're moving to the industrial area today, which leaves the second area, which is the medieval part of the world that started at this bridge right here next to our house and went off into the distance behind my head on that side of this river. We decided that where we started the world right here and built up our starter house and this big tree and then this collection of trees right here to begin this forest, this was going to be kind of the center of everything. This was going to be where we split our three different areas from fantasy to the dark medieval style over yonder, and then of course the industrial area, which will be marked by this tree line right here, as well as everything on the left side of the river, which connects the medieval side. Now, we had spent a couple of episodes out here in the dark medieval area trying to kind of bring to life a little bit of that Souls game-esque feeling, this really dark, this ominous sort of medieval vibe, something that contrasts the bright and bubbly fantasy style quite a bit. There's a lot of medieval that can kind of tie right into fantasy and can kind of border almost to an unrecognizable degree, at least unrecognizable in their differences, that is. And I wanted to make sure that if we were going to do medieval and do fantasy, that they varied and contrasted each other enough to get the full effect that these are entirely separate areas and give off entirely different feelings. And I think that's something that I want to capture with the industrial area as well. That's obviously something that doesn't really go with fantasy or medieval naturally whatsoever, but it is going to contrast those two styles quite a bit. So by increasing how much the two fantasy and medieval areas contrast each other, we kind of can better define the three different areas of this world so that we don't accidentally have two of them kind of blending together and it becoming a little less clear what's going on with how we've laid everything out, of course. So with all that being said, let's jump over to where we have some of those redstone farms built because I want to talk a little bit about redstone. So up on this hilltop over here, we've got a couple of different things going on, things that we've showcased in some of the early episodes of this series. We've got the sheep contraption right here, which is a terribly inefficient and bulky contraption, but this is what you get when you build it all without a tutorial and you try and figure everything out on your own. And you know what? I'm still proud of it, even if it's not the best thing ever, because I did it all on my own. And that same idea is going to apply with all of the different redstone things that we try and do in this world. Of course, I'll use little bits and bobs that I see other people use, some little mini contraptions that I'll link together to make things work and all of that. But when it comes to the entirety of a farm design, if I can try and come up with a way to just piece together different bits of knowledge that I've picked up over the years from various people and various builds that I've done previously following tutorials, to try and get something that works, even if it's not the most efficient way of working possible, then I'm pretty happy with it. So we've got the moss farm over here. It's got 4 different modules to it, and this is something that we may look at expanding in the future. I'm not entirely sure, but that's besides the point. The reason I'm going over a little bit of some of the redstone that we've done over here is because that's going to be the biggest tie-in for our industrial area of this world. I talked about it a little bit in the end of the last episode, but what I want to do with the industrial area is I want to combine a bunch of different styles and themes that all fit that factory-esque, industrial-esque sort of theme. So that's going to include everything from Industrial Revolution era to pre-Industrial Evolution to a little bit after. We'll go modern, we'll go steampunk, and we may even do a cyberpunk or two thing depending on if it would fit the vibe. The idea is that we can put together all sorts of different time periods and styles and themes that all kind of fit industrial or factory-esque, And what we're going to do is we're going to put all of the different redstone contraptions that we need to build or use at any point in this world inside of their own build. I think the exceptions will be some of the really small things like little 5x5 or smaller modules. We'll probably put a number of those together and then all have those in like a single building or something like that. But when it comes to something big like a moss farm or even a sheep farm over there or any of the countless other things that we'll have to do in the future, the idea is that we can put all of these things into their own builds and start to slowly build up this area of the world. We of course have the dark medieval area and we've got the fantasy area, and those are primarily going to be focused on the aesthetic, putting things together, learning to build just for the sake of learning to get better, and creating areas that look pretty or look a certain way or maybe tell a certain story. It's going to be this part of the world here with all of the industry that we focus more on the function than we do on some of the other details. Now, of course, this being a building series and a building world does mean that my main goal is going to be the building side of it. We're going to cover everything with a nice build, come up with different styles, put different things together, and we're going to have the function inside of the form. But as opposed to the other areas of the world, we are going to have a lot of function here. And I think that's my favorite way to put together various farms and redstone contraptions and anything like that when it comes to Minecraft. I love building a farm for utility, something for function, and then finding a way to dress it up, make it fit in with the world, make it vibe with everything else that you have around it, or just make it pretty by putting some big facade over it or whatever it might be. So that leaves us with a decision. Which of these two farms are we going to cover up first with a building? Well, I still haven't decided at this moment, but we're about to find out. One of the things that I did intentionally was space these out enough that we could have a building for each of them and enough of a gap between to figure out some sort of road, because I think over in this area, we're going to have more roads than we have pathways, if that makes sense. We're thinking different methods of travel than by foot because we have all of these factory types of things going on. So things like streets, whether that's for horses, carriages, or even cars in various elements, whatever it might be there to represent. The idea is that we have roads, not paths, when it comes to this area of the world. So I wanted to have enough of a gap right here, and I think we left enough of a gap. I hope we left enough of a gap so that we have set ourselves up nicely for something like that. One of the other things that we have to keep in mind is that we are on a hill right here. This is a naturally generated plateau, which does kind of go off in this direction just a little bit, so we might be able to get away with like a third building over here or something, but one thing I may have to do is terraform a good bit on that side especially, to even out the slope a little bit to make things like roads work a little bit better, going down to the more natural terrain level over there. And I think over here, this is going to kind of be one of the harsh areas, harsh transitions of the industrial part of the world, this kind of river right here. And the reason for that is because we have the Patreon forest up there representing all of our members, and that will eventually come to the edge of this hillside right here, and potentially even further down towards the river if it ever needs to. I've got some of the coarse dirt dotted right there to kind of represent it, of course, and I don't want to encroach it all over in that direction. And of course, we've only got this tiny little bit down here that isn't on the hillside, so I figure this hillside is kind of a good starting point for where we're going to have some of the industrial builds, and we'll eventually work our way kind of that way, and then definitely everywhere over in this direction here, which will border the fantasy area kind of off in that way. And we, of course, have tons of area off in that direction as well because the medieval area is kind of tucked away in that direction. So splitting the area into thirds, but not necessarily perfect thirds, just loose thirds, I guess. Anyway, long enough yap session. Let's figure out where we're going to put this thing. All right, pause. Before we go any further, it's time to talk a little bit about what we're setting up here. So I wanted to lay out a little bit of the facade to get us started, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm going to aim for here and the scale of the build as well as the feel. So as you can see, I've chosen to go ahead and cover up the moss farm with this build because I think the scale lends itself better to that as opposed to the sheep area, which is much more compact and something that probably won't grow any larger over time. Whereas I don't know if the same can be said about the moss farm because I might want to add a couple more modules in the future along this left edge of it, so I'm giving myself enough space to do so. As you can see, the first thing we did was a little bit of terraforming just to give ourselves a nice platform to kind of build all of this upon. Usually I don't like building the terrain into a build. I like to usually approach it the other way, where I'll make a build work around the terrain that we're given. However, given the fact that I want this to kind of feel a little bit like a early 1900s kind of factory, and, you know, it has a kind of crazy coloration to it, but more or less, that's kind of the vibe that I want to go for here. And because we're going to have some roads in here and streets instead of like normal pathways, I figured it would work a little bit better if I go ahead and build the terrain up to the building here, because on especially the far side over there, we're talking, you know, 5 or 6 blocks at times of a difference between the base and the foundation of this build and then the terrain as it was before. So a little bit of an adjustment there just to help us a little bit, and that's why I didn't build this into the terrain entirely like I normally like to do. Now, as for the colors, I definitely wanted to go for something bold for our very first build in the factory and industrial part of this world right here. And I figured a color that I have very little experience working with is this bright orange. So we've got a combination of the classic, some acacia wood and stripped acacia logs, and then I also mixed in some orange terracotta here as kind of our primary block, or at least base background block, if you will, and then we're just kind of splotching in some of the acacia here and there. And as we build this up and build it around all of the sides, you'll start to see it a little bit better, the texturing and patterns that we'll kind of put in the walls. But I figured that would be a really fun color to use, especially in contrast with things like deep slate, and then this really deep brown right here, which is represented via gray terracotta. Now, don't ask, I don't know. That's a question for Mojang. Why is this gray terracotta? It's not gray whatsoever. It's very clearly brown. I don't know. I don't make the rules, but hey, is what it is, and it works and does the trick. As for detailing the base layer here where we have all this gray terracotta, that's something that I need to talk a little bit more about at the end. But for now, I wanted to stop and give you guys a little bit of an insight as to some of the rest of what we're going to be doing, because our focus is very much going to be from the start of the orange all the way up. This is going to be a multi-story building, and we're even going to put some smokestacks on top and have some fun extra details that kind of really sell the fact that it's a factory and really sell the fact that we're in an industrial area of the world. Now, of course, we can only sell that so much without having like an actual road and street and other builds to neighbor it, but you'll have to use your imagination, at least for the first couple builds that we do out here, until we get enough of the surrounding area done that we can really sell it as an area as a whole, if that makes sense. Now, there is something else that I want to go over before we go into full build mode right here, and that's the windows. I came up with a really fun idea for what to do with the windows. I don't have them fully built at the moment. I've just got them kind of cut out and shaped and ready to go. So real quick, let's go over how this is going to work. All right, so it's extremely simple what we're going to do here, but it's so effective. And this is something that I used in the collab build with Drift, the Witch Manor, a couple of episodes back. But I'm going to go ahead and lay a little bit of this orange color on either side on the backdrop because our windows are going to be 2 blocks deep. What we're going to be doing here is laying out normal glass panes along this back side all the way up and all the way across. And the reason that I did those blocks right there is so that these glass panes on the edges would connect all the way over to the side back there. You'll also notice that it's starting to interact with the wall blocks a little bit, which creates a unique shape. Now, we don't just have walls that connect over to the side right here. We're adding a little bit of depth to the walls on the inside lip right here as well. Now, I love using the glass panes back here because we get a lot of these textures right here, which kind of add to that window effect, especially something a little more modern or at least less medieval time period. And the final thing we're gonna do, if I go ahead and cut this out for now, and we could figure out what to put on the base right there, but that's not the focus at the moment. We're left with something like this. I'm going to take gray stained glass panes, and I'm just going to layer these over top. I'm just going to put those right over top, and as we take a step back, we're going to see that we have just created mini glass panes on either side of this block right here, where normally you would just have one uninterrupted pane. All of a sudden, we've turned that into two small rectangular panes on either side by layering the glass panes like we did. If you look at it from a different angle, you can even get some more effects. If you look at it from like this diagonal right here, all of a sudden you've got 3 on each block, right? You create this really cool effect that feels a lot more in tune and a lot more in line with windows that you might see in the modern age, more or less. Another thing that's going to do is connect the walls yet again, of course. So now, instead of the walls just connecting on the corner and just connecting to the glass back there, we have the walls connecting here to these glass panes as well. And you'll also notice that it doesn't make the wall completely flat. We have this fun block right here, which is this wall in the middle with little offshoots on 2 sides right there, and it creates this really unique layout for the wall, and we don't even need anything crazy like a debug stick to make it happen. I think that's a night and day difference between maybe a more traditional window and something that you just put a little bit more effort into, a little bit more resources into, and you really start to see it pay off on the other side. That's going to be something that I use in all of the windows of this factory, and trust me, there are going to be a lot of windows in this factory. But I've talked about it long enough. I've showed you guys a little bit of what I wanted to go over before I really start to crank this build out. So, without further ado, it's time to build our very first of the industrial district. You know, I've gotta say, it's quite a bit bigger than I initially intended for it to be, or I even thought it would be as I tried to build it up in creative mode first. Looking at it from over here on this hillside, that factory is massive. But you know what? I think that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, the industrial district is going to be filled with all sorts of different factories and factory-like constructions and buildings and all of that kind of stuff, and at the end of the day, it is all in a large scale. At least, you know, when you try to build that style, it tends to lend itself better to a little bit of a larger scale. We will of course have this forest filling out this area long term, so it'll be a little bit less jarring from when you're over by like the house, for example, or anywhere else in the fantasy region over here. But right now, when everything's all wide open, it is definitely eye-catching, and you can't miss it, no matter where you are. If you're in Red Resistance, you're gonna see it. I think another thing it lends itself to, though, is the fact that with this world, a goal of mine since we've started it has been to build in a larger scale. I've talked about it a couple times, but everything I've been doing in this world has been in the name of trying things larger than I'm used to. We can kind of see the tree just rendering in way over in the distance over there, but that's a good example. Our starter area, of course, and then the spire off in the medieval section of the world. All really good examples of how I'm trying to evolve my style of building and my ability to really increase the scale a little bit, and then start to work a lot on some of the smaller details that you kind of allow yourself by building on these larger scales. So if we make our way up here a little bit closer, I want to go over some of the things that we did with this factory. A little bit ago, I went over some of the base details with kind of the foundation and how we were going to do the windows, a little bit of the color palette and everything like that. And of course, the fact that I was going for something that feels like it kind of comes out of the early 1900s or so, and I wanted to add a little bit of some fun little elements right here. Now, building industrial is not something I have hardly any experience with whatsoever, but I felt like looking at the facade here as I was kind of planning this build out, I felt like it needed some of these extra little details, these pipes and wires and all of these different things going on around the outside, just to add that extra little bit of intrigue. And it's not like any of these are actually functional, or that we even really have like an express purpose for any of these other than just to kind of be eye candy to dress up the exterior. And I think that's fine sometimes, especially when we're getting into industrial and the factory style and all of that, because you can do so many different things. There's really infinite combinations for these little accent details that don't even really have to make the most sense in the world, but they just kind of add to a build. They make it feel a little bit more alive and add that extra little touch. There's a couple things that I do want to point out here. So I went ahead and textured up the walls. Of course, we've got the orange terracotta, and then we've got some different acacia wood types, and I tried to do those in a little bit of a splotchy pattern around. I wanted it to kind of feel like the building's been around for a while, and wherever the acacia and whatnot starts to show up, it's kind of like the paint eroding away on the side of the building. Or maybe if we think that it's kind of some kind of brick or concrete or something like that, it's just kind of decaying. Whatever it is, you can kind of use your imagination a little bit to get these splotches of acacia to kind of feel like it's the underlayer or, you know, weathered away version of whatever material the wall is made out of. I think that creates a pretty cool effect, and we have something similar going on with the rooftops made out of deep slate, whether it's the tiles or the bricks. And there's a couple different layers of roof. There's some different shapes going on. It's not all one cohesive thing, and I'll be able to show that off in just a moment. But I also wanted to make sure that with the weathered and eroded away look, that along these nice lines right here, I tried to break them up a little bit every so often. So with the third floor up top kind of jutting out a little bit, I tried to find a couple instances where we could have it kind of breaking apart right underneath. And then contrast to that, the first floor, as that transitions to the second one, there was this really nice lip, so I went ahead and broke that up just a little bit to kind of add this little variation around there and add that subtle little detail that just helps the eroded, weathered, kind of old building feel really come to life. The door for this build is definitely a little bit of an outlier compared to the style that we're kind of going for, but you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit. For Minecraft purposes, I've got 2 regular spruce doors down there, but that's not actually how it would function. It's kind of an idea that we would arch it a little bit, and then we would have this spruce area be kind of 2 different doors that you could kind of open going either way. And then we would have it accented by this dark oak, which kind of fits with this gray terracotta right here, that kind of dark brown. Hey, it's me again. Long time no see. I just want to point out that I didn't think it was humanly possible to say the term kind of or kinda as frequently as we have seen in this episode. And the best part is that we're not done yet. Good old recording me just cannot get a grip and use any other term other than kind of or kinda. I don't know, dude. I don't know. I'm trying. There's only so much editing me can do. Anyway, back to the show. That kind of comes up and accents it. I wanted to go for something a little different. I felt like if we went for a door that almost contrasted in style a little bit, it could create this interesting look to the place and kind of make whoever's looking at it, whether that's you, me, somebody else, just makes you question a little bit, just think about it for a moment, and I think that's kind of fun to do in builds from time to time. To go against what's expected and try something a little quirky is never a bad idea. And then, of course, you've already noticed it, but we've got multiple different smokestacks coming out of here. The factory is in full blast right now with whatever it is that we decide that this can be making up. Obviously, the moss farm is inside of it, so that's actually what's going on. But, you know, for the story of it, for the purpose of why this building might be here, however you want to imagine it in your head, we've got multiple different smokestacks going. I tried to do each one up with their own kind of detail and textures and block palettes, and tried to kind of even go a little bit more unique with this one up on the side, where it's just these very faint single kind of lines of smoke that are just trickling out a little bit, or it could be steam, either way. And those right there, those are the big boys that are just chugging along as it kind of dissipates up into the sky and kind of blends in with some of the clouds and whatnot. I felt like for a factory of this size, it definitely benefits from having a lot of that going on. And I think it benefits the most from that kind of thing the farther away you look at it from. If we go stand over on that hill, like at the start of showing this off here, you really get a good indication of what it looks like. You kind of get the silhouette of the building and the smoke rising up, which just looks so good from a distance. And I think that's going to be great because this building will be viewed from a distance in all of these different areas right here. So I think that'll be awesome. And I think because the sheep farm is a lot smaller, this one, if it gets its own building, will be a pretty small building. Or we could do something that's less of a building and more of another kind of industrial build of some sorts. Maybe not like a building, but I'm almost thinking like we could do some electrical thing, like a substation. That's the one I'm looking for. Maybe we could try to build like a cool substation out of this or something. Just get kind of weird and wacky and try to build something that you wouldn't really initially think of, but something that you might see in more of an industrial area, or something that just kind of fits that vibe, right? And that way it doesn't take up too much of the space in front of this building, so that we still have a sight line from within the forest that will eventually make its way up here, and in the meantime, from over on that hill. You'll have to let me know if you have any cool ideas for some smaller industrial type things that we could do over there. It could even be a building, and a small one at that, but any ideas you have, make sure to let me know for the sheep farm, because that'll be something that I'll want to do pretty soon. But if we go around the side of the factory right here, you can see a whole lot more detail. I tried to get really creative with making all of the different parts of the factory kind of come to life and have these unique shapes and different things going on. We of course have this ladder going up this smokestack right here all the way to the top. Clearly it's not functional, but I figured using copper rods like this, like it were really large kind of ladder bars going up into the side of it. I thought that was a pretty cool look, and mostly from afar, you'll definitely get the feel that it's a ladder. Up close, it's a little bit strange because it's built into the side of it, which can kind of take away from it, but I thought it was a nice detail, so I went ahead and used the copper rods as that little touch. And then over here, we have this kind of off color area. This part of the building right here, we kind of switched to terracotta, packed mud, and granite, and I thought that was a nice contrast to the bright orange that we have going on. It's kind of in that same hue range, it's just toned down significantly and maybe shifted over slightly, and that'll give you a little bit of this contrast, this easier on the eyes kind of color to break everything up just a little bit. I figured we'd put more of these doors down here, add some archways, and have a little balcony up there on the second floor as well. And if we jump up here to the balcony, you can see we've got another door, some more of the windows that we can see the moss farm on the inside from, and a lot more of this eye candy, just random factory components, pipes, and whatnot going up the sides and all of that. I think the detailing of this build is a big part of what helps sell it so much, all of these little details with the pipes, whether it's with observers or furnaces, iron blocks, we've got some iron trapdoors, lots of wall blocks, all of that kind of stuff, just wherever it felt like it made sense, and in a way that it was kind of balanced so that it wasn't too much, but it also wasn't too little, and there was always something cool to kind of catch your eye, no matter which side you're looking at the build from. I think eventually, as we build this area up and we get a road or a street out front, we can start to have some smaller things going on, a little alleyway on the side, maybe we can connect it up to the building here with these archways. This could be some kind of loading area to either send or receive things that are made or used in the factory as a whole. And we can even do the same thing on the other side. But real quick, here's the back of the building, and you can see I decided to take that contrasty color and work it all the way around the back. We've got a lot of the same details that I kind of talked about on the front. A lot of this eye candy going on, and the back at the end of the day wasn't the most important part of the build for me. I wanted to make it respectable enough and something that still looked good, but it wasn't the main focus. And I think we've accomplished that pretty well. I could either end up putting another building on the back facing that way. We could have some trees, an open area. It doesn't really matter what we do. We've kind of left the door open to have a lot of options. And then, of course, we're on the opposite side. So over here, you can see the smokestacks a lot better. They're all way closer to this side than they are the opposite. And then, of course, with the eye candy, I kind of changed it up a little bit. And it doesn't look quite the same as it does on that far side. We've got this huge thing going up right here on the transition of the main orange part of the building with the contrasty bit right here. But again, more archways. We've got this kind of loading area, whether it's to or from or whatever the case might be. I thought this was a nice detail to kind of throw on the sides of the building so that we could have some interesting sight lines from any of the 4 directions that we might look at this build from. And if I go ahead and throw the wings on and fly up top real quick, we can see that we have another little bit of detail going on up on this ledge right here. Little bit of eye candy, of course, and this little tiny doorway that would lead into an upper level of the factory. There's not really an interior other than the moss farm, but that's intentional. We might expand the moss farm at some point, and that is pretty much the interior. We're kind of building up this industrial district around some of the utility and useful things that we need in this world, and that kind of is the interior. So you just gotta use your imagination a little bit. But I thought having this little door up here, this little accessible kind of balcony, I guess would be the word for it, or at least part of the rooftop up here, would be a really cool spot to be able to access, to have from here, whether you're looking at it from any other part of the world, or if you're just looking at the rest of the world from up here. I think it's a nice little spot. And if we step up on the rooftop from just above it, you can see some of the other details we've got going on. The main part of the rooftop over here, where we've got the smokestacks coming from. Here's a better look at some of the different details that I went with for each of these. You can see that we've got a brick and granite one, and then the other 2 are mud-based, and it's just shorter and wider and taller and skinnier with some extra little details, whether it's fence gates or walls, anything to kind of add that extra little bit of interest to what we got going on. And then, of course, a lot of this kind of air conditioner-y type thing in the ceiling. Whatever these are, you see them in all kinds of like modern builds and factories and things like that. So I honestly don't know entirely what it represents. I think it's some kind of venting, air ventilation, something or another. And it looks cool. And it feels like, you know, it fits in and kind of helps sell the thing. So I just threw some up here. I'll be the first to say I have like no idea what I'm doing when it comes to some of this stuff, at least in terms of like what they actually do or what they're actually used for. I just know they look good, and look good is what we're going for. So I think we're accomplishing that at the end of the day, and I am happy with how this factory turned out. It's a big step away from anything that I have built before, both in color palette, in style, being industrial, and all of that. It is a pretty big step out of my comfort zone, and it took me a while to kind of refine this design into something that I felt happy enough with to properly build it into the world and make this episode out of. So I do hope that you guys like it, and if you have anything that you want to input on it, whether it's about the build itself, whether it's about something that we could put around here, maybe build up the sheep farm, maybe put next to the building, behind the building, in front of it, anything like that, I am definitely all ears. You'll have to let me know in the comments. And one thing that I really need help with in the comments is how we detail the front of the area now that we have the factory in place. You'll notice that I left the foundation alone. I haven't really touched it whatsoever. We're gonna have a street or a road out here of some sorts. That'll kind of be determined by what we do there, I think. Once we know what we want to do with the sheep, that's when I'll kind of have a better idea as to how we want to lay this out. But I'm thinking a road or a street, maybe like a dead end. It could continue that way, though, off of the slope as well, because we have all of that area to work with. It could be a parking lot. I don't know. It could be anything. But this area is pretty plain. Right in front of the factory right here, I'm really unsure of what to do. I don't know if we want to try and build some machinery, like maybe we try to build some forklifts or something around here. I don't know, just to kind of add to the feel. Maybe we do some parking lot things, some vehicles or something like that. I don't know. You'll have to let me know what you think would fit this area, what you think would look good, and something that's not too big so as it doesn't take away from the main view, which is of course the factory build itself, and can more so play an accent piece to this build and even whatever build we do here and the road and this entire area up on the hilltop. But in terms of the building today, that's going to cut it. I want to say a special shout out to everyone who supports the content over on Patreon. Don't forget, if you guys want to join the Patreon, you'll get one of those trees behind me all to yourself as well. And beginning February 1st, we're doing an uncapped subathon. I do one every single year over on Twitch for our live stream. So who knows how long that's going to last. The good news is this series will not slow down. I'm still going to be working on that throughout that subathon, but we'll be live 24/7. So if you want to come pop in and check out some of the live stream action, will definitely be live starting on the 1st. Other than that, don't forget to comment down below about some of the industrial district questions I had in this episode. And as always, I hope you left today feeling just a little bit inspired.